שמי רלה גפן, אני היושבת ראש, והצהריים יש לנו רק שני ניירות, כי אדם הורוביץ לא הגיע. ואנחנו, רגע, שניכם מדברים בעברית, נכון? אז הניירות תהיינה? יהיו, יהיו בעברית. אז הנייר הראשון זה של שם לא, השם של הסשן. זה שאנחנו עוד פעם בארצות הברית, נמצאים בארצות הברית, והנייר הראשון של פרופסור יעקב אריאל, who is the director of the minor in Christianity and Culture and co-director of the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of North Carolina in beautiful Chapel Hill. And much of his research has focused on Protestantism, especially evangelical Christianity, and somebody in one of the last papers cited his book, his wonderful new book, they said. But you don't have one with you.
No, I don't.
All right, well, I'm sure you can find it on Amazon.
Thank you.
And his
title, please?
I forgot the title.
The title is An Unusual Relationship, Evangelical Christians and Jews.
Okay, thank you.
And his title today is Unofficial Conversions. I sort of call them passing for Jewish, that's my terminology, which is very appropriate for the American South. Non-Jewish participants in contemporary American synagogues. Bakasha.
Thank you very, very much. First of all, thank you all. Thank you on many levels. One of them is I'd like to thank the organizers of the workshop, and the ongoing workshop and the organizing of this conference, and to thank everybody here who actually at the time of the siesta, the Schlafstunde, are here and willing to listen to me, and the only thing that will come out of it is that you will fall asleep. And I'd like perhaps to start by saying not passing as Jews, not passing as Jews. That's the whole point of, in many ways, what we could call unofficial, informal participants and people joining the synagogue and the Jewish communities. People who were not born and raised Jewish, people who were not converted officially, but are still there in the synagogue. And are there in the synagogue sometimes for a lifetime. I wanted to start by an anecdote, a striking anecdote of a lady who is very dear to me and my wife. Her name is Betsy. I don't give names, incidentally, of congregations or people. A few years ago, the leaders of one of the two Jewish congregations in what I would call here Yefe Nof, North Carolina, somewhere there in the mountains, in the Appalachians, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, have reached Betsy and asked that she become the president of the congregation. Betsy, a very remarkable lady, intelligent, with strong appearance, professional woman, descendant of all the who's who in 17th and 18th century New England. You name a theologian, famous leader, and she is his descendant. She has been in the synagogue now for a lifetime, I would say for 4 decades, but she refused to become the president, making the excuse that she isn't Jewish, that she actually isn't Jewish. The real reason was that she didn't want to take the responsibility upon herself, of course, but this she had, this is the ace of spades, but I'm not even Jewish. How can you punish me in such a way? Non-Jews in the synagogue. It's not totally unprecedented. We would found among certain kinds of Protestant Christians since the 17th century, such as Dutch Reformed in Amsterdam of the 17th century, people who would come out of curiosity to the synagogue. We know that already in the 19th century and early 20th century in the United States, even in some places in Europe, Christians would come occasionally to hear sermons of rabbis. But as a phenomenon that changes that reshapes the synagogue, that changes its demographic and cultural amalgam, this is a new phenomenon. Until a generation ago, even less, synagogues were very much Jewish territories, Jewish tribal cultural territories. That's where you could use or say Jewish jokes, including silly Jewish jokes about the goyim. You know, the goyim drink, we don't. Those are the kind of things, incidentally, that cannot be said anymore in synagogues, because in many of the synagogues, liberal synagogues in America today, sometimes as many as half the people in the synagogues are either non-Jews or married to non-Jews or have a close non-Jewish relatives. It's not something you can say. You cannot even use anymore such mannerisms, Yiddish mannerisms that would give a feeling of Yiddishkeit, such as sei gesund and Good Yontef, because people didn't grow up on it and they didn't study it when they studied Judaism. The Jews have changed and the synagogue have changed, and one of the things that changed them is not just official gerim, but the presence of non-Jews, the very clear presence of non-Jews in the audience. I will speak, I think, more about what the changes bring with them. Now, I'm very lucky that quite a few people spoke and enlightened you. I see here Professor Tudor. I see here a number of people who gave good talks and told us that since the mid-1980s, we get 50% of Jewish intermarriages. We get, in the United States, we were told here, over 50% of Americans shift and move from the church of their upbringing to another religious affiliation. I should perhaps say that this is particularly true in certain segments of American society. The non-Jews in the synagogues come from a very clear socioeconomic background that parallels the Jewish amalgam of the synagogue. Since the 1960s and 70s, with the effect of the counterculture, Americans became even more than before what you could call a nation of spiritual pilgrims, a nation of seekers. People speak, historians of religion in America, sociologists of religion in America, such as Robert Wuthnow, speak about a generation of seekers. I will invoke here to give you an impression of the atmosphere Allen Ginsberg, who was at the same time, it's important for us, at the same time a Jew, a Christian, a Hindu, and a Buddhist. Without denying or shifting from one affiliation, one communal spiritual affiliation to the other. Unlike Yehoyada Amir, who yesterday made the claim that within monotheism there is a claim for exclusivity. You cannot be a Christian and a Jew at the same time. We had here a very interesting presentation, and part of the non-Jewish presence in the synagogue is actually based on exactly the opposite. You can accumulate and practice multiple, I wouldn't call it multiple identities because this can give us a very strange connotation. I would say complex, mixed identities that have become very much part of the American religious landscape. Perhaps the most important development for us is the breaking of the affinity between ethnic identity and religious affiliation. If we were here at the days that Van Leer was, if you saw the pictures here, the exhibition, the days that Van Leer was established. Jews were Jews were Jews were Jews. There were conversions, but Jews were, for the most part, were born Jewish or went through a process of conversion before they even entered the synagogue, as we were told here. Jews lived in their own neighborhoods. You could detect them by their names, by their appearance, by their accents, by their cuisines, by their jokes, by their... they were Jewish in many, many ways. This is true not only about Jews. In America until the 1960s, the Irish were the backbone of the Catholic Church. There were ethnic neighborhoods in America, and the neighborhoods were even white ethnic neighborhoods, Irish, Polish, Italian, Jewish. You didn't have to be an Orthodox Jew to live in a Jewish neighborhood or a Jewish area. The vast majority of the grandchildren of Irish Catholics of the mid-20th century are not Catholic. Just to give you just a striking example. I mean, there was being Irish in the mid-20th century was being Catholic, being Democratic, being a Democrat. Many, many things that you're talking about. One of the most quintessential hardcore ethnic religious groups in America, it disappeared. I mean, people still march on St. Patrick's Day, but they can be Buddhist, they can be Unitarians, they can be Jewish. They dress green and they march on St. Patrick's Day. This is the background not only for Jews searching for spiritual meanings and communities outside the fold, but of people searching for meaning and communities within Judaism. One huge development that came out of the counterculture is the individualization of religious and spiritual and communal affinity. It's not anymore necessarily part of a family unit affiliation. It's not part of an ethnic affiliation. It's more and more individual. People here invoke Jonathan Sarna, who mentioned that we are dealing now with one generation Jewish. We're dealing now with one generation Buddhist and one generation Catholic and one generation Unitarian and one generation Jewish. And although this is strange for Jews, and they think in terms of continuity, of history, sometimes of genealogy, this is more and more the case. People make their decisions on their own. Now, we were told here, and I think rightly so, by a number of people, like Professor Celia Bark-Fischman in her wonderful presentation, about the phenomenon of intermarriage, which has changed the synagogue and the Jewish community. Now, I would like to change the term when I speak about non-official participants in the synagogue and speak not about intermarriage, but forgive me, intermating, inter-friendships, inter-partnerships. Because many of the people who show up in the synagogue, non-Jews who encounter the synagogue, do so not just because they are about to marry, some of them are about to marry, or because they married Jews. As I'm mentioning nowadays, you first marry, then you contemplate your spiritual and communal options. This is very clear that the synagogues are full. Not full, excuse me, but the synagogue are now quite apparently in the synagogue we find a lot of inter-partnerships. One of the rabbis I interviewed mentioned that until recently he had quite a few of them. Quite a few of those inter-partnerships were of gays and lesbians. He says, but now those gays and lesbians get married. So I can't speak anymore of people who are here as partners and not married. But there are so many people who cohabitate or have relationships. They go to the synagogue on holidays. They sometimes go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. They bring non-Jewish partners, non-Jewish friends with them. This is one of the venues, not only intermarriage. Not only intermarriage, but what I would call inter-mating, inter-partnership. This created one of the major reservoirs for non-Jews seeking the synagogue, coming to the synagogue, contemplating the synagogue, searching the synagogue, there was a big, big mention here about women converting more than men. Where do you think the men are? Hiding in the cellar? Those men are in equivalent numbers, more or less, in the synagogue. They don't convert. And one of the things that wasn't mentioned, forgive me for mentioning it, it's not just that women are more spiritual. The process of conversion for men is, in some ways, more traumatic. What I have seen in a number of synagogues is men coming and join. I'm saying here as if we're a synagogue. This is not a sermon, exactly. Men coming to the synagogue, joining in for years, converting or not converting, sometimes converting. I've seen men who, after their first heart attack or a bypass, towards their bypass surgery, decided they do want to become Jewish. Sometimes after quite a few years of being into synagogue and raising Jewish families or families that are both Jewish and non-Jewish at the same time, this is another thing I'll talk about, decide that they want officially to become Jewish because they are actually Jewish, and it's time to accept that or to make it more affirmative. A phenomenon that I think became very evident in the last decade, I haven't noticed it before, or even half a decade, is not just mixed partnerships who show up in the synagogue, and not even partnerships in which one is Jewish and the other is non-Jew, but what we see is a partnership in which both members are both Jewish now and something else. You go on Saturday to the synagogue and on Sunday to the Episcopal Church. You go on Saturday to the synagogue and Sunday to the Presbyterian Church. Those, incidentally, are not arbitrary examples, because many of the non-Jews in the synagogue of that kind of relationship, of that kind of choice, come from very certain or affiliated with certain Christian groups and not with others. Incidentally, nowadays in synagogue, you also get Jews, that is, Jewishly born Jews who make such choices. If you think that there is no such thing as being a member of a Jewish community and a non-Jewish community, think again. Because I've met such people, and rabbis, think about it. Previously, I think rabbi was not the person you would tell about. You would share about your multi-religious affiliations, but as one rabbi mentioned, oh, they're not afraid of me. Now, besides this huge reservoir of people coming out of mixed partnerships, we have what we would call spiritual secrets. People mentioned here that Judaism, the status of Judaism as a pariah social group, as a pariah religion, has changed enormously in the last half century, if not starting before, but certainly in the last half century. Judaism received enormous legitimacy. It became very much a white, if you will, a white middle class, upper middle class professional environment, known for its relative openness and over social and cultural and religious issues. It's a legitimate place for certain types of spiritual and communal secrets to search. Synagogues are therefore, have more and more among them people who come on visits out of interest, out of curiosity, then giving the synagogue a chance, searching, thinking. I'm always mentioning of certain kind, and I think it's time to put some of the cards on the table. The synagogue, and this has to do with Jews too, incidentally. The Jewish communities, at least those that I searched in the south of the United States, are very much middle, upper middle class, professional, educated professional communities. If you're working class, if you work in a garage, you probably will not feel comfortable in the synagogue. I'm saying that with a certain amount of sadness, but I think this is true. I think this reality was very different in half a century ago, let's say in a place like New York, where you could also join shtibels in the Lower East Side. But that's not the case anymore in suburban America or small town America. Those who join in very much parallel, socioeconomically, and in their education and interest, the Jewish community. They don't necessarily parallel the Jewish community ethnically. You will see most are white, middle class, but there is a growing percentage that you notice in a synagogue of people who are black, Asians, and of Latina background. The synagogue are changing in their faces. If you entered the synagogue half a century ago, it was very much a community of Eastern and Central European Jews, with Middle Eastern Jews making the ethnic exception if they were not in their own communities. Nowadays, you come into a Jewish community, and besides the very evident adopted children who are Asian, black, or Latino, you get mixed couples or partners of different ethnic groups, and you get spiritual seekers of different ethnic groups, although in their education and professional standings, they are pretty much a mirror of the Jewish community and Jewish synagogue. Since I don't have much time, and I thought of speaking about the difference between Reform and conservative synagogues, because I studied both, and for the sake here of Dahlia Marks, if not anybody else, I would say that and I can go into, in conservative synagogues, you go to the Torah with your partner only in rite of passage ceremonies, bar mitzvahs, nei mitzvot, not mitzvah, when you celebrate your marriage anniversary. In Reform synagogue, in theory, the sky is the limit. And everything is, in theory, much more flexible. What my discovery showed, and perhaps some people would argue with me, is that actually the differences are more between congregations and depend enormously. Congregations are not shaped necessarily by their rabbis, but attitudes towards non-Jews and towards would-be converts or converts is shaped enormously by the rabbis, because those people seek the rabbi, talk to the rabbi, hear the rabbi's opinions. And there could be, amazingly, conservative congregations that are more open, more inclusive, more don't ask, don't tell, quote unquote, in people's affiliations and in people's private lives and other commitments, than Reform synagogues, where the rabbi sometimes is very orthodox. Not in the sense that he is more observant, but in the sense that he goes by the book. I'll just invoke, you can say good things about people while mentioning their names. I mentioned Betsy, it's a real first name. I will mention, for the sake of Rela Geffen, Steve Sager, who in that case is a reconstructionist of the reconstructionist of the reconstructionist in a conservative synagogue. He was my rabbi for almost 20 years. He now retired. But besides that, and making the claim that it's really the congregation and the rabbi and the social atmosphere and the cultural atmosphere more than anything else, I want to speak about the way the synagogues are reshaped. I knew this moment would come, the guillotine falling on my head, but
don't, just relax. We want to get to Srdjiou. And I want you to have a chance to speak.
I already mentioned that the cultural atmosphere in the synagogue changes. I would say that one of the things that brought non-Jews to the synagogue is a decline in the ethnic, cultural, tribal atmosphere in the synagogue, and that this process is enhanced by the presence of non-Jews. Rabbis and presidents, if they are Jewish, because their presidents are not Jewish, have to take into consideration when they offer sermons. The president usually offers the Yom Kippur sermon, which is the good time to mention, to remind people that they should be paying their dues and giving contributions. Incidentally, there was a mention about Jews and non-Jews in the synagogue. One of the many things that are keeping people for many years, but in a non-official status, has to do also with Jews, because the synagogue has not only official members but non-official participants. Another group, incidentally, since someone mentioned Moshe Shoked and his research on Israelis in America in the synagogue, then I would mention another group that doesn't like to join officially. There's the non-Jews who don't join officially, and there are the Israelis who don't join officially. See, some people know about the phenomenon. Non-Jews are active in all liberal synagogues, in education, in community schools, in various committees. In conservative synagogues, they cannot join the liturgical committee. But they change the discourse in the synagogue. We Jews cannot even be said in the synagogue. Jewish jokes, Jewish expressions have to be very seriously curtailed. The messages and the atmosphere is more spiritual and religious and less ethnic. This is a general trend. I hope some people here will find it controversial. A general trend in the last half century in American Judaism is the diminishing of the ethnic, cultural Jewish groups, movements, and the definition of Judaism more and more as a spiritual religious tradition. This is, I think, one of the major elements that brings people to the synagogue and that reshapes the synagogue further. And I believe that if you check the non-Jewish participants, you will find that this is what brings them to the synagogue. And in that, to follow on Sylvia Bark-Fischman, they are the Jews of the Jews. They are really interested in what Judaism has to offer spiritually and intellectually. They're not there to make an ethnic statement. With that, I will complete, and hopefully there will be many, many questions that will enable me to say many things I could not say, or for lack of time, or because I didn't want to touch about too many points. Thank you very much for your attention.